this video, I'm going to talk about the differences between a cone 10 reduction glaze firing, cone 10 reduction glaze firing in the soda kiln, and tell you a little bit about what makes RAKU firing really unique. So in our cone 10 reduction kilns, which are the Clayterian and the car kiln, we tend to fire our pieces primarily glazed, and that kind of cone 10 reduction firing will have all these beneficial effects on the glaze by making coppers turn red, giving you a lot more variety in the glazes, and just kind of nuance and depth to the surface of the glaze that you don't get in reduction. And also the clay, as I've mentioned before, changes colors. So if the clay has iron in it, it's going to go a richer, darker brown color. And if it's porcelain, it's going to be a little bit of a cool bluish gray color on the clay. But generally, while it's perfectly fine to put things in the cone 10 reduction that aren't glazed, generally people do, but that doesn't mean that you have to. The soda kiln is also a cone 10 reduction kiln, but it has the ability for you to also introduce soda into the kiln. Now soda, it gets introduced into the kiln later in the firing, around cone 6 to cone 8 if you're firing to cone 10, and around cone 4 if you're firing to cone 6. And if you look inside the kiln, you can see it's a crazy crusted, rich brown glazed surface in there. And that is because while you can also glaze your pieces, we do introduce soda ash into the kiln, like I said, at either cone 4 if you're firing to cone 6, and around cone 6 to cone 8 if you're firing to cone 10. What happens with that soda ash when we put it in the kiln is that it volatilizes, turns to a gas, and is extremely attracted to silica. So it is very attracted to your clay, which has a lot of silica in it, and your glaze, which has silica, of course, because silica is basically the glass of the glaze. But it's a primary component of the clay as well. So it lands on your clay and your glaze and creates its own glaze. So you can put something that doesn't have any glaze on it in the soda firing, introduce the soda, and then when you take that out of the kiln, it's going to have a beautiful glassy surface. The soda kiln is notoriously uneven, like it doesn't spread the soda evenly throughout all your pieces in the kiln. So you're probably going to get places that might seem a little bit dry, and then places where it's going to be rich and crusty with drips of soda, which are really pretty cool. Sometimes they're a little too much, and they might actually fuse your lid onto your teapot and you won't be able to get it off. There's a certain there's a lot less control in a soda firing than there is in an oxidation or a cone 10 reduction firing. Some other things about the soda kiln is that we have separate shelves that we use in there, because our normal kiln shelves also have a lot of silica in it, and they would be destroyed in the soda kiln because the soda ash would be attracted to the silica in those kilns. So it's really in those kiln shelves. So it's very important that you get some instruction from our technician or myself or another teacher before you go and fire the soda kiln. So number one, you can't let your pieces sit on the shelf directly. We have to use these little balls of what we call wadding, which is a mixture that deflects or detracts the soda, so it keeps your pieces from fusing to the kiln shelves. You have to make sure you use the correct kiln shelves and the correct kiln wash that's for soda firing that doesn't have any silica in it. And you also need to dip the pieces of furniture that allows you to stack the shelves like 1 inch into the kiln wash as well, to make sure that they don't stick to the kiln shelves. That kiln has been used for quite a while. It has a lot of soda residue on the inside of it. So generally when you're firing that kiln, you don't need to add more than 1 or 2 pounds of soda to get a really nice soda effect. As a matter of fact, if you didn't introduce any additional soda and you fired that kiln to cone 10, you would still see evidence of soda on the surfaces just from the volatilization of all the soda that's just encrusted on the surfaces of the kiln walls and ceiling and floor. There's a lot more detail to firing this soda kiln, and as I said, like introducing the soda is its own specific technique that you need to be taught in person before you fire that kiln. One other thing, just a safety thing, the soda is not, when it's volatilizing in the kiln, you do not want to breathe it. You want to make sure that the whole room fan is on when you're doing that. And we have a respirator for you to wear, and for anyone who might be helping you to wear while you're introducing the soda, and for the half hour after the introduction when the air is particularly toxic in the kiln room. So please wear that when you're firing the soda kiln. Okay, RAKU kiln. The RAKU is typically a low fire technique. But it's a technique where you put your clay through a lot of thermal shock. So typically we would use the Los Altos clay or the Dover sand or another high fire clay, not porcelain and not casting slip, to do RAKU firings in it. So it's not a technique where you get a vitrified mature clay at the end. You actually get very open clay that has had really crazy reduction happen to it. So again, low fire. Typically you can fire maybe 5 or 6 pieces only in the RAKU kiln. It is a gas kiln. It has no regulation. It's just like a little thing that turns the gas on. The gas is way too strong in that kiln, so there is a mark that I don't want you to ever go above. One of the biggest risks when you're firing pieces in the RAKU kiln is you fire them too fast and they blow up because the temperature is increasing so fast. So you want to hold back. You want your first firing in that kiln to take 2 hours to get to temperature, and you need to work to make sure that you resist the temptation to let that happen too fast. So with that kiln, typically we just put I usually put an 07 cone in there, and I just rest it against a piece of brick or something because I'm very likely to blow up a cone pack in there because it gets hot really fast. So when you glaze pieces for the RAKU, remember that where you don't glaze them, the clay is likely to turn black, which is really beautiful. So you may want to just minimize the amount of glaze you use. And we have specific glazes for the RAKU firings, which you'll need to ask where they are because they're not always out. But if you're ready to do a RAKU firing, you want to glaze your pieces the day before the firing. Again, because of the speed of the process, you don't want to blow your pieces up because they had a lot of leftover moisture from the glazing. So we want that to dry overnight. Then put your pieces, like I said, you put 5 or 6 in the kiln, shut the door to the kiln, put an 07 cone in there that you can see, and then turn the gas on. You'll see that there's no pilots or anything, so you actually have to physically get something, usually a propane torch, to light the RAKU kiln. Again, don't turn it up too fast. After about 2 hours, the cone 07 should be falling, and the glazes should not look bubbly. They should be smooth. If they are still bubbling, you really need to slow the kiln down and allow them to stop boiling basically and smooth out before you take them out. Once you're ready to take the pieces out and do the kind of the RAKU part of the process, first call campus police and tell them that we're doing a RAKU firing and there's going to be a little bit of smoke around the arts building. So if somebody calls them and says there's a fire, they know not to call the fire department. That's really important. Call campus police and tell them that for the next hour, there's going to be smoke around the arts building. Second, you want to get the bin of safety gear. So there's leather jackets, leather aprons, leather gloves, and face shields. So you want to put 2 to 3 people need to gear up. If you're going to be one of the people gearing up, you have to have closed-toed shoes. No flip-flops, no sandals. Please be safe. So you want to gear up. We have 2 sets of tongs that you can pull things out when they're red hot. And what you do is you pull them out, you put them in the metal garbage cans. That's a little bit risky, so you have one person who's in charge of the garbage can. They lift the lid up, all the while using it like a shield to protect themselves, because sometimes flames will leap out of there. Because what we're doing is we're putting our red hot glazed melted pieces into a can of flammable material. It's usually either newsprint or straw, and it's going to ignite right away. And then we put the lid back on there, and we reduce, and that starves the flame of oxygen, and it creates this heavily reduced atmosphere in there, which is what kind of defines RAKU. Typically, because our RAKU kiln's inside, you want to make sure that as soon as you have maybe 2 or 3 pieces in that can, you pull it outside the door really quickly. And we do have a couple caution signs that we put out there to keep people away from the hot bins. And then usually I recommend that you also go get one of the yellow metal gates from the sculpture area and put that out as well, just to make sure we don't have any random passerbys burn themselves on those garbage cans. So, like I said, you can really only fire about 2 cans worth, or maybe 5 or 6 pieces in the RAKU kiln at once, because once you start taking them out, the temperature in the kiln goes down drastically, and you're not going to have the good desired effects of the heavy reduction if your pieces cool down a lot. So again, you do about 6 and about 2 cans, take them outside, let them sit for about a half hour, and then you can start trying to find them in the burned up newsprint and straw. Take them out carefully, because they're probably still going to be pretty hot. And at that point, you can probably take them to the sink and scrub them down and see what they look like. And then, of course, please don't forget to bring the cans in, let them sit overnight. And the next day, it's very important that you come back and dump out the excess carbon and burned up straw and newsprint, dump it in the dumpster. But it has to happen the next day, because we wouldn't want to set the dumpster on fire by accident. So yeah, that's RAKU. It's low fire, but you use a high fire clay to do it. We have special glazes, and it's not something you can do without 2 or 3 people available to help you during the time when you take the pieces out of the kiln, put them in the garbage can, shut the lid on that, and then you pull them outside to the courtyard. Yes, okay. Again, RAKU firing, soda firing, not anything I want anyone to do without getting permission and being trained in how to do them before you do them alone. Thank you.